The crystalline towers of Nexera gleamed under the light of 3 suns, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors of the council chamber. Ambassador David Walsh walked slowly through corridors that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, the only human sound in a place designed to dwarf and intimidate lesser species. The Galactic Dominion Council had ruled for over 10,000 years. 7 ancient races had divided the galaxy, among themselves establishing laws that governed trade, expansion, and the very right to exist among the stars. Humanity had been tolerated as a curiosity for 2 centuries, a young species playing at space travel while their betters watched with amusement. That amusement had turned to concern, then to fear, and now to action. Walsh paused before the massive doors that led to the inner sanctum. Each door stood 50 meters tall, carved from a single piece of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. The symbols etched into their surface told the history of galactic conquest in languages that predated human civilization by millions of years. The doors opened without sound, revealing a chamber that could have held a small city. 7 thrones arranged in a perfect circle dominated the space, each crafted from materials unique to the species that ruled from them. At the center, a holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy, thousands of worlds connected by trade routes and bound by laws older than human memory. High Arbiter Vathak rose from his throne of living metal. The being stood 4 meters tall, his body a fusion of organic tissue and technological enhancement that had long since transcended the boundaries of natural evolution. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Human. Representative Walsh, Vathak's words resonated through the chamber. Your species has been summoned to answer for violations of galactic law. Walsh had expected this moment for months. Intelligence reports from human colonies had painted a clear picture. The council was growing nervous. Humanity's expansion had accelerated beyond all projections. What should have taken millennia was happening in mere centuries. High Arbiter, Walsh replied, his voice steady despite the overwhelming presence before him. Humanity stands ready to address any concerns. The council may have. A sound like grinding stone emerged from another throne. The representative of the hegemony of Altair leaned forward, her 6 arms gesturing in patterns that conveyed barely contained hostility. Concerns? Her translator rendered her clicking speech into standard galactic. Your species has violated every principle of ordered expansion. 43 systems colonized in 2 centuries. 43. Walsh knew the numbers. Every human did. They were a source of pride, not shame. While other species had spent millennia carefully establishing single colonies, humanity had rushed outward with desperate energy. Earth's population explosion had demanded new worlds, and human ingenuity had found ways to make the impossible possible. The galaxy is vast, Walsh said carefully. Surely there is room for all peoples to grow and prosper. The laugh that echoed through the chamber came from the crystalline collective's representative. The being was nearly transparent, its thoughts visible as patterns of light within its crystal body. Room? It pulsed. Young human, you understand nothing of galactic order. Space is not infinite. Resources are not unlimited. Every world your species claims disturbs balances that have existed since before your star was born. Vathak raised 1 metallic hand for silence. The gesture carried such authority that even the other council members immediately fell quiet. The expansion of humanity ends now, he declared. This is not a negotiation or a request. This is a directive from the governing authority of this galaxy. The holographic display at the center of the chamber shifted, highlighting human colonies in pulsing red. Walsh watched as the display zoomed in on each world, showing population figures, industrial capacity, and defensive capabilities. The Council had been watching everything. Humanity will withdraw from all systems beyond your original 5 colonies, Vathak continued. These worlds will be redistributed to species with proper authorization for expansion. Your people will be relocated to designated areas where they can be properly supervised. Walsh felt his heart racing but kept his expression neutral. The Council cannot seriously expect us to abandon millions of our people. The Council expects compliance, another voice interjected. This came from a representative whose species Walsh had never encountered before, a floating mass of what appeared to be living energy contained within a force field. Your species has demonstrated concerning levels of aggression and adaptability. These traits must be corrected. The word corrected hung in the air like a poison. Walsh had heard rumors of what happened to species that required correction. Genetic modification, behavioral conditioning, sometimes complete restructuring of their society until they posed no threat to established order. Humanity appreciates the Council's guidance, Walsh said slowly, but we cannot accept terms that would abandon our people or alter our fundamental nature. The silence that followed stretched for long minutes. Walsh could feel the weight of 7 ancient civilizations considering his words. When Vothak finally spoke, his voice carried a note that made Walsh's blood run cold. "Then you have chosen poorly," the High Arbiter said. "Your species has 30 standard days to begin compliance. Withdrawal of all human presence from unauthorized systems must commence immediately. Failure to comply will result in corrective action." Walsh knew he was being dismissed, but he had to ask the question that burned in his mind. What sort of corrective action? Vothak's metal features shifted into what might have been a smile. The kind that ensures compliance, Ambassador. The kind that has maintained galactic peace for 10 millennia. The great doors opened behind Walsh, but he didn't immediately move. The Council should understand that humanity values freedom above all else. We will not willingly surrender what we have built. Your species' valuation of freedom is irrelevant, Vothak replied. What matters is order. What matters is stability. What matters is the continuation of civilization as it has existed for longer than your people have possessed written language. Walsh turned and walked toward the doors, his mind already racing through the implications of what he had heard. As he reached the threshold, Vothak's final words followed him into the corridor. 30 days, Ambassador. Use them wisely. The journey back to human space would take 2 weeks. That left precious little time to prepare for whatever corrective action the Council had in mind. As Walsh's ship cleared Nexra's gravity well and jumped to hyperspace, he activated an encrypted communication channel to Earth. The message was simple. They want us to surrender everything. We have 30 days before they make us. He didn't need to add that humanity would never surrender. That much was understood by every human who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of walking among them. The only question now was what price the Council was willing to pay to maintain their ancient order. Walsh suspected they were about to find out. The morning sky above New Horizon burned with the light of 3 moons, painting the growing city in shades of silver and gold. Children played in the streets while their parents prepared for another day of building humanity's newest home among the stars. The colony had been established only 5 years earlier, but already boasted a population of over 2 million souls who had traveled across the galaxy seeking new opportunities. Maria Santos was hanging laundry in her backyard when the first ships appeared. At first, she thought they were human vessels arriving with supplies from Earth. The gleaming hulls caught the morning light beautifully as they emerged from hyperspace. Their elegant curves unlike the blocky utility of human ships, but still somehow familiar from news, broadcasts, and educational programs. It wasn't until the bombardment began that Maria realized these were Council vessels. The first energy beam struck the spaceport with surgical precision. The massive facility that connected New Horizon to the rest of human space vanished in a pillar of superheated plasma that reached from the ground to the upper atmosphere. The shockwave that followed shattered windows across half the continent and knocked Maria to her knees. Captain Luke Anderson was conducting routine patrol exercises in the destroyer, Defiant, when his sensors detected the Council fleet. His ship was one of only 3 military vessels in the system, assigned to protect against pirates and natural disasters rather than full-scale military assault. The sight of 200 Council warships emerging from hyperspace sent ice through his veins. "All stations, battle alert," Anderson ordered, knowing even as he spoke that his small force stood no chance against such overwhelming numbers. "Signal. Earth immediately, tell them New Horizon is under attack." The Council fleet moved with the precision of a military machine that had perfected its craft over millennia. Dreadnoughts the size of city blocks positioned themselves in high orbit while smaller vessels swept through the system, hunting for any human ships that might escape to carry word of what was happening. Anderson watched helplessly as the orbital bombardment intensified. Energy beams that could crack mountains lanced down from space, targeting government buildings, factories, and transportation hubs with methodical efficiency. The Council wasn't simply attacking, they were systematically dismantling human civilization on New Horizon. The first wave of panic hit the population as news broadcasts cut to emergency signals. Families grabbed whatever they could carry and ran for evacuation centers that were being destroyed even as people reached them. The few civilian transports that managed to launch from smaller landing pads found themselves hunted by Council fighters that treated them not as refugees but as legitimate military targets. Anderson pushed his ship toward the third continent where the largest civilian evacuation was taking place. Thousands of people were crowding onto cargo vessels and passenger liners, desperate to escape the systematic destruction of their world. The sight of families clutching children while alien warships circled overhead like predators filled him with a rage he had never experienced. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a general broadcast from the Council fleet." "Put it through," Anderson replied, though he suspected he already knew what the message would contain. The voice that filled the bridge belonged to High Arbiter Vuthak himself. The alien's words were delivered with the same cold authority Anderson remembered from diplomatic broadcasts, but now they carried the weight of absolute power backed by overwhelming force. "Attention human colonists of the world designated New Horizon," Vuthak's message began. "Your species has refused to comply with lawful directives from the Galactic Dominion Council. This world serves as demonstration of the consequences of such defiance. All human presence beyond your original 5 systems constitutes illegal occupation and will be eliminated." Anderson's tactical display showed Council ships moving to intercept the fleeing civilian vessels. The alien warships possessed overwhelming technological advantages. Shields that could deflect any weapon in the human arsenal, engines that could outrun anything humanity had built, and firepower that could reduce a city to atoms in minutes, but they were targeting unarmed civilian ships full of families. "All weapons target the lead interceptor," Anderson ordered. "Fire everything we have." The Defiant's missiles and energy weapons struck the Council vessel's shields and dissipated harmlessly. The alien ship didn't even bother to return fire, instead continuing its methodical pursuit of a passenger liner carrying 3,000 refugees. Anderson watched in horror as the Council ship's energy weapons tore through the civilian vessel's unshielded hull. The liner broke apart in seconds, scattering debris and bodies across the void. Among the wreckage, he could see the tiny figures of people who had been sucked into space, their final moments spent watching their children die. Beside them, the massacre continued for 6 hours. Anderson managed to rescue 3 transport ships by using his own vessel as a shield, absorbing energy blasts that would have vaporized the civilian craft. His ship's armor held barely, but he was forced to watch dozens of other vessels die. While he could save only a few, when the bombardment finally ended, New Horizon was a broken world. The 3 major cities had been reduced to radioactive craters. Industrial centers that had taken years to build were nothing but twisted metal and glass. Of the 2.3 million people who had called the planet home that morning, fewer than 50,000 had managed to escape. The Council fleet departed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a planet that would remain uninhabitable for generations. As Anderson's damaged ship limped toward the nearest human system, his crew worked frantically to care for the survivors crowded into every available space. Among the refugees was 8-year-old Tommy Chun, who had watched his parents die when their evacuation center was destroyed. The boy sat in the ship's medical bay, staring at nothing while medics treated burns that covered half his body. When Anderson knelt beside him, Tommy looked up with eyes that held an adult's understanding. Of loss, they killed everyone, the boy whispered. Why did they kill everyone? Anderson had no answer. The Council's message had made their intentions clear. This was merely a demonstration. Submit to their demands or watch every human world beyond Earth suffer the same fate. The calculated cruelty of targeting civilians, of hunting down refugee ships, was meant to break humanity's spirit and force immediate surrender. As reports from New Horizons spread across human space, the reaction was everything the Council had expected and nothing they were prepared for. Mass protests erupted on every human world, but these weren't calls for peace or negotiation. The crowds that filled the streets were demanding blood for blood, revenge for the innocents who had died under alien guns. Anderson filed his report from the medical bay where he was helping care for survivors. The words came slowly, each one weighted with the memory of what he had witnessed: the systematic murder of civilians, the hunting of refugee ships, the cold precision with which the Council had demonstrated their power. His final entry contained a single line that would be remembered throughout human space. They made it clear that mercy is weakness and surrender is the only acceptable response. They were wrong on both counts. Deep in classified bunkers on Earth and a dozen other worlds, military leaders who had been hoping for peaceful resolution began activating protocols that had existed only in theory. If the Council wanted to demonstrate the consequences of defiance, humanity would be happy to return the lesson. The age of trying to coexist with the Galactic Order was over. The age of total war was about to begin. Deep beneath the surface of Titan, in tunnels carved from solid ice and hidden from all orbital sensors, Admiral Rebecca Torres watched the construction of humanity's answer to galactic tyranny. The facility had been excavated in secret over the past decade, disguised as a routine mining operation while engineers worked around the clock to build something the galaxy had never seen. The first ship rolled out of the assembly bay 3 weeks after New Horizons' destruction. It bore little resemblance to traditional human vessels with their clean lines and efficient designs. This craft was a weapon from nose to stern, bristling with launch tubes and armored and layered composites that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. Most importantly, it carried humanity's newest innovation, weapons that could kill Council ships. Torres had spent 30 years in the Colonial Defense Force, rising through ranks while watching humanity's expansion across the stars. She had always known this moment would come. The galaxy's established powers would never allow a young, aggressive species to claim its place among the stars through merit alone. Force was the only language they truly understood. "Admiral," her aide reported. "Captain Anderson has arrived?" Anderson entered the command center still bearing the scars of New Horizon. His ship had been repaired, but the man himself carried wounds that would never heal. Torres had read his report a dozen times, studying every detail of how Council forces had systematically murdered civilians while hunting refugee ships like prey. "Captain," Torres greeted him, "I trust your crew is ready for what comes next." Anderson's eyes swept across the massive display screens showing ship construction across dozens of hidden facilities. "My crew has been ready since we watched families die in space while Council ships laughed," he replied. "What are our orders?" Torres activated the holographic projector at the center of the room. The display showed a star chart covering 3 spiral arms, with human colonies marked in blue and Council territories in red. But now there were new symbols, green dots, indicating hidden construction facilities, weapons depots, and staging. Areas that had been prepared in secret for over a decade. "Operation Wildfire begins tomorrow," Torres announced. "Every major Council patrol route, supply convoy, and isolated outpost will be hit simultaneously. We're not just responding to their aggression, we're demonstrating that humanity plays by different rules." The ships emerging from hidden construction yards represented a fundamental shift in human military doctrine. While other species built vessels for exploration, trade, and traditional warfare, humanity had designed pure instruments of destruction. The weapons they carried had been tested in secret for years, perfected in facilities so classified that their existence was known only to a handful of people. The key breakthrough had come from studying Council technology captured during previous conflicts. Their energy shields were nearly impenetrable, capable of deflecting any plasma or laser weapon in known space. But shields worked by redirecting energy, not stopping physical matter. Human engineers had simply asked the obvious question: what happens when a solid object hits a shield at near light speed? The answer was devastation on a scale that made traditional weapons obsolete. Captain Ryan Burke commanded the first test of the new weapon system. His ship, the Revenge, approached a Council patrol in the Centauri system 3 days after operation. Wildfire began. The alien vessels detected his approach and moved to intercept. Confident in their overwhelming technological superiority, the lead Council cruiser was a magnificent example of their shipbuilding art, nearly 2 kilometers long. Its crystalline hull pulsed with inner light while energy shields shimmered around its form like protective aurora. The ship had served in the Council fleet for over a century. Its weapons, capable of reducing planets to ash and its defenses proof against any known threat, Burke's targeting system locked onto the cruiser's center mass. "Fire," he ordered. The relativistic projectile launched from the Revenge's primary weapon was little more than a dense metal rod, accelerated to 30% of light speed by a series of magnetic fields that had taken humanity's finest minds 5 years to perfect. It struck the Council ship's shields and passed through them as if they didn't exist. The kinetic energy involved far beyond anything the defensive systems had been designed to handle. The cruiser split in half along its entire length, its sophisticated hull materials offering no more resistance than paper against the devastating impact. Secondary explosions lit up space as the ship's power systems overloaded, creating a brief star that outshone the system's sun. Burke's communications officer was already broadcasting on all Council frequencies. "This is the Colonial Defense Force. You killed our civilians. You hunted our children. Now you learn what happens when you wake a sleeping giant." Similar scenes played out across dozens of systems as humanity's hidden fleet emerged from nebulae, asteroid fields, and empty space to strike targets that had never been threatened in living memory. Council forces found themselves facing an enemy that ignored every convention of civilized warfare, targeting supply lines, isolated patrols, and support facilities with ruthless efficiency. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Council crews who had grown accustomed to overwhelming superiority suddenly faced the possibility of death in every system. Trade routes that had operated safely for millennia became hunting grounds where human ships appeared without warning, struck with overwhelming force, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Admiral Kalos of the Crystalline Collective lost an entire sector fleet when human forces emerged from a nebula that his sensors had declared empty. The attack came without warning or demands for surrender. 30 Council ships simply ceased to exist in the span of 5 minutes. Their wreckage scattered across light years of space. The message was clear: humanity would not be negotiating terms or accepting limited conflicts. This was total war fought by a species that had embraced concept completely. Torres monitored the reports from her command center, watching as decades of careful preparation finally bore fruit. The Council had made a fundamental miscalculation about human nature. They had assumed that the massacre at New Horizon would break humanity's spirit and force submission. Instead, it had awakened something that the galaxy's ancient civilizations had forgotten existed. "Admiral," her intelligence officer reported, "we're receiving communications from Council home systems. They're requesting emergency sessions of their governing councils." Torres smiled without humor. The Council was finally beginning to understand what they had unleashed. For 10,000 years, they had maintained order through overwhelming force, applied against species that accepted the rules of engagement. They had never faced an enemy willing to burn down the entire galaxy rather than submit to tyranny. "Send a message to all fleet commanders," Torres ordered. "Phase 2 of Wildfire begins immediately. No Council military asset is to be considered off-limits. No Council world is to be considered safe. They wanted to demonstrate the consequences of defiance. Let's return the favor. The response from human colonies was immediate and enthusiastic. Species that had watched helplessly as their neighbors submitted to Council authority suddenly saw hope in humanity's example. Some began providing intelligence about Council movements and weaknesses, while others started organizing their own resistance movements. The galaxy's ancient order was beginning to crack, and the fault lines were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The Council had spent millennia perfecting the art of controlling civilizations through fear and overwhelming force. They had never considered what would happen when they faced a species that refused to be controlled. As reports of human victories spread across space, Torres permitted herself a moment of satisfaction. The Council had declared war on humanity, expecting quick submission. Instead, they had awakened a storm that would reshape the galaxy forever. The real war was just beginning. The war room aboard the Council flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with desperate activity as fleet commanders from 7 species struggled to comprehend reports that defied everything they understood about warfare. High Admiral Theron of the Crystalline Collective stood before a tactical display that showed red markers spreading across previously secure space like a virus consuming healthy tissue. "Impossible," muttered Commander Valix of the Hegemony of Altair, his 6 arms gesturing frantically at the data streams flowing across his workstation. "No species develops this level of military capability in mere centuries. Our intelligence networks would have detected such construction." Theron's crystalline form pulsed with frustrated patterns of light. His fleet had ruled the spaceways for 3 millennia, enforcing Council law through superior technology and overwhelming firepower. The concept that primitive humans could threaten vessels that had never known defeat was beyond his ability to process. "The humans have violated every principle of civilized warfare," Theron declared. "They target supply convoys, attack isolated outposts, and show no regard for the established rules of engagement. This is not war, this is barbarity." The irony of his words was lost on the Council commanders who had spent the past month hunting human civilian ships and reducing colonies to radioactive ash. To them, warfare had rules and proper procedures that maintained galactic stability. Humanity's approach threatened not just their military supremacy, but the philosophical foundations of their civilization. Captain Anderson received his new assignment while his ship was being resupplied at a hidden base in the asteroid belt. The battleship Retribution was unlike anything humanity had ever built. Its hull designed around a single purpose, delivering kinetic projectiles with enough force to crack moons. Standing on its bridge, Anderson felt the weight of responsibility that came with commanding humanity's most powerful weapon. "Target is the Tau Ceti system," Admiral Torres explained during the briefing. "Council intelligence indicates they're massing the largest fleet in their history for a final push against Earth, 200 ships including 5 dreadnoughts that have never been defeated in battle." Anderson studied the tactical data with grim satisfaction. The Council was finally committing to the kind of massive engagement that would let humanity demonstrate the full extent of their new capabilities. Rules of engagement? "There are no rules," Torres replied. "The Council made that clear when they murdered families at New Horizon. Destroy everything that threatens human space." The journey to Tau Ceti took 3 days, giving Anderson time to prepare his crew for what would likely be the largest space battle in human history. His 30 ships were outnumbered 7-1, facing vessels with superior shields, more powerful engines, and weapons that could glass planets. By every measure of traditional warfare, the human force should have been annihilated within minutes. The Council fleet arrived in perfect formation, their ships arranged in the classical battle lines that had dominated space combat for millennia. Dreadnoughts anchored the center while cruisers and destroyers formed supporting wings, designed to envelop and destroy any opposing force. The sight was magnificent and terrifying. 200 vessels that represented the combined military might of 7 ancient civilizations. Fleet Admiral Corvain commanded the Council forces from his flagship, a dreadnought so massive it generated its own gravity field. His species had been waging war among the stars since before humans discovered fire, and he approached this battle with the confidence born of absolute technological superiority. Human vessels detected, his tactical officer reported. 30. Ships in defensive formation around the fourth planet. Corvain studied the enemy formation with professional interest. The human ships were crude by Council standards, their angular hulls lacking the elegant curves that marked truly advanced technology. They appeared to be preparing for a traditional engagement, which struck him as foolishly optimistic given the overwhelming odds. Open communications, Corvain ordered. Give them the standard terms for surrender. The response came from the lead human vessel in a voice that carried the distinctive accent of the outer colonies. This is Captain Anderson of the Colonial Defense Force. Your terms are rejected. Prepare to face the consequences of murdering innocent civilians. Corvain's translator struggled with the human concept of consequences in this context. No species in recorded history had ever threatened the Council fleet, let alone demanded they face judgment for their actions. The presumption was so absurd it bordered on comedy. Destroy them, Corvain commanded. The Council attack began with the precision of a military machine perfected over millennia. Energy weapons that could melt asteroids lanced across space while guided missiles accelerated to impossible speeds. The human ship's crude armor should have evaporated under such overwhelming firepower. Instead, the Council discovered that human defensive technology had evolved far beyond their intelligence estimates. Point defense systems using the same kinetic principles as human weapons created walls of projectiles that destroyed incoming missiles before they could impact. Armor designed to absorb rather than deflect energy-absorbed plasma blasts that should have been instantly fatal. Anderson watched the Council barrage impact his fleet's defensive screens with satisfaction. Their weapons are impressive, he observed to his tactical officer. Too bad they're fighting the last war instead of this one. The human counterattack began with a synchronized launch that sent thousands of projectiles racing toward the Council. Formation at relativistic speeds. The aliens' energy shields, designed to deflect plasma and laser weapons, proved utterly useless against solid matter moving at 30% of light speed. The first Council dreadnought to die had served in over 50 major campaigns during its 800-year service life. Its crystalline armor had never been penetrated, its shields had never failed, and its crew had never imagined facing weapons that could simply ignore their defensive systems. The kinetic projectile that struck its center mass passed through shields, armor, and internal bulkheads as if they were made of paper. The explosion that followed created a brief star that illuminated the entire system. Secondary detonations from the ship's massive power cores sent debris racing across space at velocities that turned fragments into deadly projectiles. Two nearby cruisers were crippled by their own flagship's death throes. Corvain watched in horror as his perfect formation disintegrated under a barrage of weapons that shouldn't have existed. Ships that had dominated space for longer than human civilization simply ceased to exist, their sophisticated technology rendered meaningless by the raw physics of kinetic energy. Impossible, he whispered, echoing words spoken by Council commanders. Across a dozen systems. No species can develop such capabilities so quickly. Anderson's response came across the communication channels with deadly clarity. You spent millennia perfecting technology to defeat other people's weapons. We spent decades designing weapons that ignore your technology entirely. The battle became a systematic demonstration of how warfare changes when one side abandons traditional concepts of fair play. Human ships operated in small groups that struck from unexpected angles, targeting command vessels and support craft while avoiding direct confrontation with heavily armed but slow dreadnoughts. Council forces found themselves fighting an enemy that appeared, struck with devastating effect, and vanished before they could respond. Their superior sensors and tracking systems proved useless against ships that didn't fight according to established patterns. The turning point came when Anderson's force emerged from behind Tau Ceti's largest moon and launched a full barrage at the remaining Council dreadnoughts. The massive ships, designed to anchor battle lines and provide overwhelming firepower, became sitting targets for weapons that could punch through any defense they possessed within 6 hours. The largest Council fleet ever assembled had been reduced to scattered debris and fleeing survivors. Of the 200 ships that had arrived to crush human resistance, fewer than 30 escaped to carry word of the disaster back to their home systems. The aftermath sent shockwaves through Council space that reached far beyond military circles. Species that had submitted to alien rule for millennia suddenly saw proof that the invincible Council fleet could be defeated. Trade routes became dangerous as human ships hunted supply convoys with impunity. Fortress worlds that had never been threatened found themselves under siege from enemies that struck without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Most disturbing to Council leadership was humanity's complete disregard for civilized norms of warfare. While galactic conflicts traditionally followed established rules that protected civilian populations and preserved infrastructure, human forces targeted everything that supported their enemy's war effort: mining stations, trade depots, communication relays, and even diplomatic facilities became legitimate targets in humanity's campaign to dismantle the Council's ability to wage war. The message was clear: if the Council wanted to fight like barbarians by targeting civilians, humanity would respond by treating all Council assets as military targets. As reports of defeat reached the highest levels of alien government, leaders who had ruled unchallenged for centuries faced a reality they had never imagined. The galaxy's newest species had not just rejected their authority, they had demonstrated the ability to destroy it entirely. The ancient order that had maintained stability for 10 millennia was crumbling, and the beings responsible for its collapse showed no interest in negotiation or mercy. 8 months after the massacre at New Horizon, High Arbiter Vothak stood in what remained of the Council's war room aboard a heavily damaged command station, orbiting the ruins of their former fleet base. The crystalline walls bore scorch marks from human kinetic weapons, and half the sophisticated control systems lay in twisted wreckage. Outside the reinforced windows, debris from once mighty dreadnoughts drifted in lazy orbits around the planet below. The reports covering Vothak's desk painted a picture of systematic destruction that defied everything he understood about warfare. Humanity had not simply defeated Council forces, they had dismantled the infrastructure of galactic governance with surgical precision. Trade routes that had operated safely for millennia had become hunting grounds where human ships appeared from nowhere, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could respond. "Status report?" Vothak demanded, his metallic voice betraying none of the fear that coursed through his enhanced nervous system. "Admiral." Theron's crystalline form flickered with patterns of distress as he consulted his remaining functional displays. "The Fourth Fleet has been completely eliminated. The Seventh Fleet lost 60% of its ships in the Procyon ambush. Our supply lines to the outer territories have been cut, and 17 fortress worlds are under siege by forces we cannot locate or engage effectively." Vothak absorbed this information with growing horror. The Council had ruled through overwhelming technological superiority for 10,000 years. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their defenses impenetrable. Yet somehow, a species that had barely reached the stars was systematically destroying everything they had built. "How are they doing this?" Vothak asked. "Our intelligence networks reported no significant military construction. Our sensors detected no fleet movements. How did they develop weapons that render our defenses useless?" The question hung in the air because none of the assembled commanders had an answer. Humanity's kinetic weapons shouldn't have been possible according to known physics. The energy requirements for accelerating solid matter to relativistic speeds should have demanded massive installations that would be visible from across the galaxy. Yet human ships no larger than Council destroyers were delivering firepower that could crack moons. Meanwhile, Admiral Torres stood in the command center of her new flagship, watching real-time reports of the final phase of Operation Wildfire. The holographic display showed human forces converging on Nexara itself, the ancient capital world where the Council had ruled unchallenged since before Earth's continents had settled into their current positions. Final approach coordinates confirmed, her tactical officer reported. All strike groups are in position. Torres studied the defensive grid surrounding the Council's home system with professional appreciation. Orbital platforms the size of cities, bristled with weapons that could sterilize planets. Automated defense networks extended their coverage across light years of space. The system's 5 fortress moons had been converted into military installations that could house fleets, capable of conquering entire star systems. It was the most heavily defended location in known space, protected by weapons and shields that represented 10 millennia of technological advancement. Under normal circumstances, attacking such a target would require fleets, numbering in the thousands, and would likely result in the complete destruction of any attacking force. But Torres had not brought a normal attack force, Captain Anderson received. The final briefing aboard the Retribution while his ship held position in the system's outer asteroid belt. Around him, 60 of humanity's most advanced warships waited in perfect silence, their crews preparing for an assault that would either end the war or destroy them all. Primary objectives are all government and military installations, Torres explained through encrypted communication. The Council leadership must understand that their authority no longer exists. Secondary objectives include orbital infrastructure and defensive platforms. Civilian areas are not to be targeted unless they contain military assets. Anderson nodded grimly. Despite everything the Council had done, humanity would not sink to their level by deliberately targeting innocent populations. The distinction mattered to him personally, even if it made the mission more difficult. What about their inevitable surrender offer? Anderson asked. Torres's expression hardened. There will be no negotiations. The Council chose to murder children when they attacked New Horizon. They forfeited any right to mercy when they hunted refugee ships. This ends today. The assault on Nexara began not with a frontal attack, but with a demonstration of humanity's complete mastery of kinetic warfare. Thousands of projectiles launched from hidden positions throughout the system converged on the planet simultaneously, their trajectories calculated with mathematical precision to avoid populated areas while striking every military installation. With devastating effect, the Council's orbital defense platforms, engineering marvels that had protected the capital for millennia, simply ceased to exist. Their energy shields proved as useless as paper against solid matter moving at near-light speed. Weapons that could destroy fleets became expanding clouds of debris in seconds. Vothak watched the destruction from his command bunker deep beneath the planet's surface, his enhanced senses struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. The defensive grid that had made Nexara invulnerable was being systematically dismantled by weapons that ignored every principle of advanced military technology. "Sir," his aide reported with barely controlled panic, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies." Admiral Torres's voice echoed through the ruins of the Council's seat of power with the authority of absolute victory. "High Arbiter Vothak, your fleets are destroyed, your defenses are broken, and your authority is ended. The Galactic Dominion Council is hereby dissolved. Any attempt to reassert control over free worlds will result in the complete extinction of your species." The words carried a weight that transcended mere military defeat. For 10,000 years, the Council had represented order and stability in a chaotic galaxy. Species had submitted to their rule because the alternative was unthinkable conflict and suffering. Now humanity was offering something the galaxy had never known: freedom from any central authority. "You cannot simply dissolve galactic government." Vothak transmitted back, his voice containing desperation he tried to conceal. "Without the Council, there will be chaos. Wars between species, conflicts over resources, the collapse of everything we have built." Torres's response came without hesitation. "Then let there be chaos. Freedom is worth any price, and slavery, disguised as order, is still slavery. Your species chose to rule through fear and murder. That age is over. The bombardment continued for 6 hours, reducing every symbol of council authority to rubble while carefully avoiding civilian areas. Government complexes that had housed the archives of galactic law became craters. Military academies where alien officers had trained for centuries were reduced to ash. The crystal spires that had represented the pinnacle of council architecture lay shattered across the planet's surface. Most importantly, the orbital shipyards where council fleets had been built for millennia were completely destroyed. Without the ability to construct new vessels, the surviving fragments of their military could never again threaten human space or any other world seeking independence. As the attack concluded, human ships withdrew to the system's edge, but did not depart. The message was clear: Nexera would remain under observation indefinitely. Any attempt to rebuild military capability would be met with immediate destruction. The response from across the galaxy was immediate and transformative. Species that had submitted to council rule for centuries declared their independence within hours of news reaching their worlds. Trade agreements were dissolved, tribute payments ceased, and the complex web of dependencies that had maintained galactic order began to unravel. The hegemony of Altair found their subject worlds refusing to provide resources or acknowledge their authority. The crystalline collective discovered that species they had considered permanently subordinated were forming their own governments and military forces. Across 3 spiral arms, the rigid hierarchy that had maintained peace through oppression collapsed as world after world claimed the right to self-determination. Some council loyalists attempted to maintain their authority through force, only to discover that human ships appeared wherever freedom was threatened. The Colonial Defense Force had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a military power that intervened solely to prevent oppression rather than to expand territory or influence. Captain Anderson found himself patrolling trade routes that had been reopened under human protection, ensuring that former council worlds could trade freely without fear of retribution. His ship encountered a convoy of vessels from 12 different species, all flying under their own flags for the first time in living memory. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a message from the convoy commander. He wants to thank us for making this possible." Anderson smiled as he watched the diverse collection of ships continuing their journey through space that was finally free. "Tell him that freedom was always their right. We just reminded the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for." 6 months after the fall of Nexera, the transformation was complete. Former council territories had reorganized into voluntary confederations based on mutual benefit rather than imposed hierarchy. Trade flourished as species no longer needed to funnel resources through council-controlled systems. Scientific advancement accelerated as researchers shared knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for military advantage. The galaxy was not without conflict. Freedom brought disagreements and competition that had been suppressed under council rule. But these were disputes between equals, resolved through negotiation or limited conflict rather than the systematic oppression that had characterized the previous age. High Arbiter Vithak spent his final days in exile on a remote world, stripped of the technological enhancements that had made him more than mortal. In his last transmission to the scattered remnants of council loyalists, he acknowledged the magnitude of their miscalculation. "We believed that order required hierarchy and that peace demanded submission," he said. "We never considered that a species might choose death over slavery or that freedom could be worth any price. The humans taught us that some things cannot be conquered, only awakened." Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching Earth's sun rise over the planet that had given birth to humanity's dream of the stars. The war was over, but the greater work of maintaining galactic freedom had only begun. Human ships would patrol the spaceways for generations, ensuring that no species could again claim dominion over others. The Council had made one final, fatal error in their long history of ruling through fear. They had assumed that humanity would react to oppression the same way every other species had, with submission and acceptance of their fate. Instead, they had awakened something that would reshape the galaxy forever. The age of tyrants was over. The age of freedom had begun,